The Comanche Empire's devastating raid on Santa Fe. The thundering sound of 2,000 horses shattered the pre-dawn silence as Comanche warriors descended upon Santa Fe in the summer of 1758. Spanish settlers, awakening to what would become one of the most devastating raids in colonial history, faced a military force unlike anything European powers had encountered in the New World. These were not the scattered bands of native resistors that Spanish chronicles had dismissed. They were the vanguard of an empire that would dominate the American plains for over a century, mastering a form of mounted warfare that would humble 3 nations and reshape the heart of a continent. From their stunning metamorphosis from pedestrian hunters into supreme horsemen, to their creation of the largest Native American empire ever seen in North America, the story of the Comanche stands as one of history's most remarkable tales of adaptation and conquest. This is not merely another chapter in the saga of the American West. It is the epic of how a single tribe, through military genius and cultural revolution, came to control an area larger than the European empire of their Spanish rivals, forging a domain that stretched from the Arkansas River to the heart of Mexico, and forever changing the balance of power in North America. Birth of the Comanche warrior culture. In the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, a transformation was taking place that would alter the destiny of North America. The Numunu people, known to history as the Comanche, were about to embark on one of the most remarkable cultural revolutions ever witnessed. Living as modest hunter-gatherers among their Shoshone kinsmen in the upper reaches of Wyoming, they appeared no different from dozens of other small bands, scratching out an existence in the harsh mountain terrain. But a singular event would change everything: their first glimpse of the Spanish horse. The speed with which the Comanche mastered horsemanship defied belief. Within a single generation, children who had once learned to stalk deer on foot were now being born into families that lived, fought, and died on horseback. They developed techniques never before seen, youngsters learning to slide along a galloping horse's side to shield themselves from enemy arrows, warriors mastering the art of firing arrows, rapid fire, while hanging from their mount's neck. The Spanish, who had introduced horses to North America, watched in growing alarm as these mountain people transformed themselves into something entirely new: centaurs of the American plains. Their entire society reorganized itself around the horse. Traditional Shoshone social structures crumbled as new hierarchies emerged based on riding skill and raiding prowess. The Comanche developed a complex horse culture that surpassed even the Spanish masters who had brought the animals to the New World. They selectively bred their horses for speed and stamina, creating bloodlines so prized that a single Comanche warhorse could be worth multiple captives in trade. Their children learned to ride before they could walk, strapped into special cradle boards attached to their mothers' saddles. As the 17th century drew to a close, the Comanche began their dramatic descent from the mountains onto the southern plains. They did not merely migrate, they exploded across the landscape with revolutionary force. Spanish observers recorded their astonishment at encountering war parties that could cover 60 miles in a single day, a mobility that seemed supernatural to European military minds trained in formal battlefield tactics. The Comanche developed a unique style of mounted combat that combined the horsemanship of Eurasian steppes with innovations uniquely suited to the American plains. A 14-foot lance wielded from horseback with devastating effect, and shields made of multiple layers of buffalo hide that could stop musket balls. By 1700, as Spanish settlers in New Mexico looked northward with growing unease, the transformation was complete. The modest mountain people had vanished, replaced by what one Spanish commander would later call the finest light cavalry in the world, The Comanche had not merely adapted to a new way of life, they had engineered one of history's most remarkable cultural transformations, setting the stage for a century of dominance that would reshape the American West. The evolution of warfare, Comanche cavalry tactics, 1700-1740. On a spring morning in 1706, Spanish soldiers at San Juan Pueblo watched in horror as a new kind of warfare unfolded before them. Comanche warriors, appearing seemingly from nowhere, executed complex cavalry maneuvers that would have impressed the finest European military academies. But these were no formal military exercises. The warriors could shoot arrows with deadly accuracy while hanging off the sides of their horses at full gallop, a technique that made them virtually impossible to hit. The Spanish muskets, deadly in traditional combat, proved nearly useless against an enemy that could loose 6 arrows in the time it took to reload a single shot. The Comanche understood the power of firearms. They simply refused to become dependent on them. Instead, they developed a revolutionary military doctrine that turned the Spanish weapon advantage on its head. Their warriors learned to time their attacks to coincide with the precious seconds when Spanish soldiers were reloading. They mastered the art of the feigned retreat, drawing pursuers into deadly ambushes where Spanish cavalry formations shattered against coordinated attacks from multiple directions. A Spanish officer's report from 1723 described their technique. They circle like whirlwinds, their arrows coming from all directions, while our shots find only empty air. But the Comanche's true military genius lay in their ability to adapt their enemies' weaknesses into their own strengths. They noticed how Spanish horses, bred for power and ceremonial display, tired quickly in extended pursuits. In response, they developed a unique breeding program, creating horses that combined Spanish bloodlines with wild Mustang stock. The result was a war horse that could cover vast distances at speed, then engage in combat while still fresh. These horses became so valuable that a single superior mount could be worth 5 ordinary horses in trade. By 1740, the Comanche had developed a military system that would dominate the southern plains for the next century. Their warriors could strike anywhere within a 1,000-mile radius, appearing and disappearing like phantoms. They mastered the art of fighting in darkness, using the light of the moon to guide raids that left Spanish settlements reeling. Their tactical sophistication reached such heights that they could coordinate multiple war parties across hundreds of miles, tying down Spanish forces in one area while striking undefended targets in another. One Spanish governor wrote in despair, "They have made a science of terror, and we find ourselves students in our own land." Building the Comanche Empire, mastering the plains, 1740-1780. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Texas plains as a Comanche trade caravan stretched for nearly a mile. Hundreds of horses, laden with buffalo robes and precious trade goods, moving steadily toward Taos. This wasn't just commerce, it was empire building. The Comanche had discovered something their European rivals hadn't yet grasped. True power in the plains lay not in holding territory, but in controlling the spaces between. By 1740, they had begun to forge what historians would later call the Comancheria, an empire built on mobility, trade, and strategic control of key resources. Their diplomatic masterwork came in the form of their alliance with the Kiowa. Unlike the Spanish, who demanded submission from their allies, the Comanche offered the Kiowa something far more valuable: partnership. The two tribes created a mutual defense pact that effectively controlled all major river crossings from the Arkansas to the Red River. This alliance transformed the southern plains into a vast economic engine, with the Comanche controlling the flow of horses northward and buffalo products southward. They became the middlemen of an indigenous trade network that stretched from the pueblos of New Mexico to the British traders on the Missouri. The Comanche Empire operated on a logic that baffled European observers. Instead of building cities or establishing fixed boundaries, they created a network of mobile power centers that shifted with the seasons. Summer camps could host thousands of people, transforming overnight into major trading hubs where Spanish, French, and indigenous traders gathered under Comanche supervision. These gatherings were more than markets. They were demonstrations of Comanche power, where complex diplomatic relationships were negotiated through elaborate protocols of gift-giving and ceremonial trade. Their economic sophistication reached levels that rivaled European trading systems. The Comanche developed a complex pricing structure for horses based on age, training, and bloodline. They established trade relationships with former enemies, including some Apache bands, creating buffer zones that protected their core territories. By 1780, their economic influence had become so profound that Spanish officials in New Mexico found themselves forced to adjust their colonial policies to accommodate Comanche trading patterns. The Spanish peso became a common unit of exchange in Comanche camps, while New Mexican settlements increasingly operated on Comanche terms of trade. A Spanish report from 1775 noted with resignation, "The wealth of our provinces now flows through Comanche hands, and we find ourselves becoming a mere outpost in their economic realm." The heart of Comancheria pulsed with a rhythm entirely its own, a complex dance of seasonal migrations, coordinated hunting expeditions, and strategic raiding that maximized their control over the region's resources. Their annual calendar became a sophisticated management system. Spring raids into Mexico captured horses that would be traded northward in summer, while fall buffalo hunts produced the robes and meat that would be traded southward in winter. This wasn't just adaptation to the plains environment, it was mastery over it on a scale that wouldn't be seen again until the Industrial Age. Masters of the Southern Plains, Comanche Diplomacy and Power, 1780–1820. A Mexican cavalry officer's report from 1783 captured the paradox of Comanche power. They arrive as traders in the morning and return as raiders by night. The Comanche had perfected a form of diplomatic duplicity that left colonial powers scrambling to respond. They could negotiate peace treaties with Spanish governors in Santa Fe, while simultaneously orchestrating raids on Spanish settlements in Texas, playing one colonial jurisdiction against another with sophisticated political precision. Their power had grown so immense that Spanish officials found themselves forced to negotiate with individual Comanche bands as if they were sovereign nations. The Comanche's military dominance reached its apex during this period, demonstrated most dramatically in their systematic dismantling of Apache power. The Apache, who had once dominated much of Texas and northern Mexico, found themselves caught in a vice between Comanche expansion and Spanish settlement. Comanche war parties drove the Apache from the best buffalo hunting grounds, forcing them into the harsh desert regions of western Texas and New Mexico. A Spanish missionary recorded the Apache exodus with grim clarity. They flee from the Comanche like deer before wolves, abandoning hunting grounds their fathers held for generations. Their relationship with New Mexican settlements evolved into a complex web of interdependence. Comanche bands would designate specific villages as trading partners, offering protection in exchange for access to markets and craftsmen. They developed sophisticated protocols for these relationships. Certain chiefs would be responsible for specific trading corridors, while others specialized in diplomatic relations with different colonial powers. The system became so intricate that by 1800, some Comanche leaders were essentially operating as regional trade ministers, coordinating commerce across vast territories. This era witnessed the rise of legendary Comanche leaders like Ten Bears, whose diplomatic skills matched his military prowess. In one famous encounter, he outmaneuvered a Spanish diplomatic mission by hosting them in a camp of 10,000 people, with 15,000 horses grazing nearby. A display of wealth and power that left the Spanish negotiators stunned. The message was clear. The Comanche weren't merely asking for recognition, they were demonstrating the futility of resistance to their dominance. By 1820, Comanche influence extended from the Arkansas River to deep into Mexico, and from the Rocky Mountains to East Texas. Their raids into Mexico became so effective that entire regions of northern Mexico were depopulated. Spanish cavalry patrols rarely ventured north of the Rio Grande without Comanche permission, and New Mexican settlements survived largely at Comanche sufferance. A Spanish general summed up the situation with brutal honesty. "We do not control the North. We merely inhabit those parts of it that the Comanche allow us to hold." The Trading Empire, Comanche horse market and cross-cultural trade, 1820–1850. In the spring of 1820, at the height of their power, the Comanche hosted what might have been the largest horse market ever seen in North America. On the banks of the Red River, over 20,000 horses gathered for trade, their value exceeding the annual budget of many Mexican provinces. French traders from St. Louis mingled with Mexican merchants from Chihuahua, while Comanche chiefs orchestrated a complex series of negotiations that would distribute these horses throughout their vast trading network. This wasn't just commerce. It was a display of economic might that demonstrated how thoroughly the Comanche had transformed from raiders into sophisticated merchants. Their trading system had evolved into something resembling a modern commodity market. Different bands specialized in specific aspects of the trade. Some focused on horse breeding, others on raiding for fresh stock, while others became experts in training and evaluation. The Comanche developed sophisticated price differentiation. A well-trained buffalo hunting horse might be worth 10 ordinary ponies, while a top-tier war horse could command the equivalent of a small fortune in trade goods. They understood market forces with remarkable sophistication, carefully controlling the supply of horses to maintain high prices. These decades marked the apex of Comanche wealth accumulation. Elite families lived in lodges furnished with fine Spanish silver, French textiles, and English firearms. They wore clothes decorated with thousands of pearl buttons, acquired through trade networks stretching to the Gulf Coast. Some chiefs maintained herds of thousands of horses, their wealth on the hoof exceeding that of the richest Mexican haciendas. A visiting American trader in 1843 wrote with astonishment of seeing Comanche camps where silver coins were so plentiful they were used as bullets in times of shortage. But perhaps their greatest economic innovation was their development of what historians now call the Comanche Exchange, a sophisticated trading system that linked the economies of the Great Plains with those of Mexico and the American frontier. They became masters at arbitrage, understanding price differences between different regions and moving goods accordingly. Buffalo robes that cost almost nothing to produce on the plains could be traded for precious metals in Mexican markets, which in turn could be exchanged for manufactured goods from American traders, creating a constant flow of wealth into Comanche hands. By 1850, their economic power had reached such heights that they effectively controlled the flow of horses throughout the central portion of the continent. American expansion westward found itself dependent on Comanche-supplied horses, while Mexican ranchers increasingly operated as junior partners in Comanche trading networks. A Texas Rangers report from 1847 captured the situation perfectly. The Comanche don't just control the horse trade, they are the horse trade. Every mount from the Red River to Chihuahua passes through their hands at some point, and they take their toll on each transaction. War with Texas, the Clash of Empires, 1836-1860. The Declaration of Texas Independence in 1836 set the stage for one of the most dramatic military confrontations in North American history. The Texans, full of confidence after their victory over Mexico, found themselves facing an indigenous empire that had been perfecting the art of warfare on the southern plains for over a century. The first major clash came in August 1840, when a massive Comanche raid struck Victoria and Linville, Texas. The coastal town of Linville, then the second largest port in Texas, was reduced to ashes. The raiders carried off so much plunder that their retreat slowed to a crawl, leading to the Battle of Plum Creek, a confrontation that would shatter both sides' illusions about the conflict ahead. The Texas Rangers, formed specifically to combat Comanche raids, discovered that their celebrated fighting methods needed complete reimagining. Their traditional tactics proved nearly useless against an enemy that could strike anywhere along a 1,000-mile frontier. The Rangers' eventual adaptation gave birth to modern guerrilla warfare techniques. They learned to travel light, live off the land, and match Comanche mobility. Samuel Walker, one of the most famous Rangers, collaborated with Samuel Colt to develop the Walker Colt revolver specifically for mounted combat with Comanche warriors, fundamentally changing the nature of frontier warfare. Buffalo Hump, the Comanche war chief who had led the Great Raid of 1840, emerged as one of the most brilliant military commanders of his era. He developed a system of mobile warfare that combined traditional Comanche horse tactics with innovations forced by new weapons technology. Under his leadership, Comanche raiders learned to attack in smaller, more dispersed groups, making it impossible for Texan forces to concentrate their superior firepower effectively. An exasperated Texas commander wrote in 1845, "They strike like lightning and vanish like smoke. We might as well try to fight the wind." The decade of the 1850s brought a new intensity to the conflict. The discovery of gold in California had turned Texas into a major transit route, with vulnerable wagon trains providing tempting targets. The Comanche response was ruthlessly strategic. They focused their raids on the horses and mules necessary for westward travel, effectively gaining control over the pace of American expansion. They understood that by controlling the animal power needed for transportation, they could influence the entire Western movement. But this period also saw the first cracks in Comanche power. The introduction of new weapons, particularly Colt revolvers and long-range rifles, began to neutralize their cavalry advantages. More significantly, the massive flow of settlers into Texas meant that even successful raids brought diminishing returns. For every settlement destroyed, 2 more appeared. As the 1850s drew to a close, both sides found themselves locked in a conflict that would transform not just Texas, but the entire American West. A Comanche chief speaking to a Texas Peace Commission in 1858 captured the tragic scope of the conflict. "We have been fighting for our hunting grounds. You have been fighting for your towns. Neither of us can win without destroying what we are fighting for." The Last Stand, Comanche Resilience and Winter Campaigns. The Civil War years had provided the Comanche with a brief respite from American expansion, but the conflict's end brought a terrifying new reality. battle-hardened Union generals turning their full attention to the plains. In 1868, General Philip Sheridan introduced a strategy that would change everything: winter campaigns. For centuries, the harsh plains winters had served as the Comanche's shield, a time when no enemy would dare venture into the storm-ravaged grasslands. But Sheridan's troops, equipped with new repeating rifles and winter gear, struck Comanche camps in their most vulnerable season, when their horses were weak and their mobility limited. The emergence of Quanah Parker marked the final dramatic chapter of free Comanche life. Son of a captured white woman, Cynthia Ann Parker, and the great war chief Petanoconah, Quanah combined tactical brilliance with an understanding of both worlds that would prove both an advantage and a harbinger of change. At the Second Battle of Adobe Walls in 1874, he led one of the most sophisticated attacks ever attempted by Plains warriors. A pre-dawn assault using the cover of darkness and coordinated small-unit tactics that nearly succeeded in overwhelming a fortified trading post defended by long-range buffalo guns. But the end came not through military defeat, but through ecological catastrophe. Commercial buffalo hunters, equipped with powerful new rifles, began systematically exterminating the great herds that had sustained Comanche power for 2 centuries. In just 3 years, from 1872 to 1875, they killed over 3 million buffalo on the southern plains. Without the buffalo, the entire economic and military foundation of Comanche power collapsed. An elderly warrior, watching the destruction, prophetically stated, "They are killing the heart of our world." The final campaign came in 1875, as Colonel Ranald Mackenzie's 4th Cavalry pursued the last free bands into the Llano Estacado, the vast, waterless plateau that had long served as a Comanche sanctuary. The pursuit culminated in Palo Duro Canyon, where Mackenzie's troops found and destroyed over 1,000 Comanche horses. For a culture built on mounted mobility, this was the killing blow. Within months, the last free bands, led by Quanah Parker himself, made their way to the reservation at Fort Sill. Yet even in surrender, the Comanche influence endured. Quanah Parker transformed himself into a bridge between worlds, becoming a successful rancher and negotiator for his people's rights. The martial prowess that had made the Comanche the Lords of the Plains found new expression in the U.S. Army's cavalry doctrine, which incorporated many of their tactical innovations. Their empire had fallen, but their legacy of mobility, adaptation, and indomitable spirit had forever changed the American West. As Quanah Parker himself would later reflect, "We did not surrender. We came to an agreement with time." Legacy of the Comanche: transformation and resilience. Standing at the Fort Sill Cemetery in 1911, an elderly Quanah Parker gazed at his mother's grave, Cynthia Ann Parker, finally reinterred next to her son's future resting place. This moment captured the extraordinary arc of Comanche history, a people who had transformed themselves from mountain dwellers into the most powerful indigenous empire North America had ever seen, now watching their world transform once again. But unlike many Native American stories, the Comanche legacy was not one of simple defeat. It was one of profound and lasting influence on the very nation that had ended their dominance. The modern American Southwest bears the indelible stamp of Comanche influence. The famed Texas Rangers became the model for law enforcement across the frontier, their methods forged in combat with Comanche warriors. The American cattle industry, which would come to define Texas identity, was built on Spanish horses that had passed through generations of Comanche breeding programs. Even the iconic image of the American cowboy owes much to Comanche innovation. The techniques of mounted cattle handling that became ranching standards were originally developed by Comanche horse culture. Today's Comanche Nation, headquartered in Lawton, Oklahoma, maintains a vital presence in contemporary America. Their language program uses modern technology to preserve their ancient tongue, while their businesses and casinos generate revenue that supports cultural preservation and economic development. The descendants of the empire builders have adapted once again, turning their ancestors' skill at negotiation and trade into success in the modern economy. In 2014, the Comanche Nation partnered with the U.S. military to share traditional horse handling techniques with Special Forces units, bringing their martial expertise full circle. Perhaps the most profound legacy of the Comanche Empire lies in how it forces us to reimagine Native American history. Their story demolishes the simplistic narrative of indigenous peoples as passive victims of European expansion. Instead, we see a nation that seized new technologies, revolutionized warfare and economics, and built an empire that dominated the heart of North America for over a century. As one modern historian noted, the Comanche didn't just resist colonization. They became colonial powers themselves, forcing Spanish, Mexican, and American settlers to adapt to their terms. In the end, the story of the Comanche Empire stands as a testament to human adaptability and the complex nature of power. From the mountains of Wyoming to the plains of Texas, they created something entirely new. An empire without cities, a civilization based on mobility, and a legacy that continues to shape our understanding of both Native American history and the American West itself. Their empire may have fallen, but their influence rides on in the DNA of a continent they helped forge.